There is a person in the room. You have met them. They drive a car with a small dent in the rear quarter panel that they have not fixed. Their jacket is unremarkable. Their watch is the kind that tells time and does nothing else. They order water at dinner and nobody notices because they do so without ceremony. You have made a calculation about this person. The calculation took less than 4 seconds. It was probably wrong. Now consider the other person in the same room. The car is new. The shoes are immediately recognizable to anyone who tracks such things. The apartment they mentioned is in a building with a doorman and a roof terrace. The story they told involved a first-class upgrade, mentioned once, not belabored. You have made a calculation about this person too. It also took less than 4 seconds. That calculation may also be wrong. This is the wealth invisibility problem. Not that wealth is hidden on purpose, though sometimes it is, but that the signals we use to read it were never reliable instruments to begin with. We built a shorthand out of necessity. The human brain processes thousands of inputs every hour and cannot evaluate everything from scratch. So it reaches for proxies. Brand, neighborhood car, watch, vocabulary, posture. These are the shortcuts. They save time. They also mislead consistently and across every level of the economic ladder. Here's what the shorthand misses. Wealth is not one thing. It is at least 4 different things, and they do not always move together. Net worth is the total. Assets minus liabilities. It is the number that tells you what someone would be left with if everything resolved at once. It is real, but it is also largely invisible and frequently illiquid. A person with $800,000 in home equity and $40,000 in a retirement account has a high net worth and may not be able to cover a $15,000 emergency without borrowing. Income is the flow. What arrives each month, each year. High income is visible in behavior when it is spent. It is invisible when it is not. A household earning $340,000 a year and spending $335,000 of it looks wealthy and is one bad quarter from fragility. A household earning $91,000 and deploying $28,000 of it into index funds looks ordinary and is building something that will not announce itself for a decade. Cash flow is the margin. What is left after obligations are met? This is the number that actually governs daily life and daily choices. It determines whether an unexpected car repair is a minor inconvenience or a crisis. 2 people can have identical salaries and radically different cash flows depending on the fixed costs they have accumulated. Liquidity is the speed at which wealth can move. A person with $2.4 million in real estate and $18,000 in savings has a net worth that sounds secure and a liquidity position that is genuinely constrained. A person with $380,000 in index funds can access that capital in days. The number is smaller, the flexibility is not. When you look at someone and read their wealth, you are usually reading a single visible variable and extrapolating it across all 4. That is where the misread happens. There is another layer beneath this. 2 people can look identical from the outside for entirely different reasons. One is under signaling intentionally. They have the means, they have the margin, and they have decided that communicating those things publicly creates no advantage for them and carries several disadvantages. The other is not signaling because there is nothing to signal. The same secondhand jacket, the same ordered water, the same quiet at dinner. The first person made a choice. The second is managing a constraint. From across the room, you cannot tell the difference. That is the point. The reverse is equally true. Wealth can be performed at great cost. The car that required a loan that consumes $870 a month. The apartment that leaves $200 in discretionary spending after rent clears. The watch that was the entire bonus. Debt is extraordinarily good at mimicking wealth in the short window that social observation covers. The problem is that observation only sees the surface, and debt is an underwater structure. You cannot see it from above. What you see is the behavior it purchased, presented cleanly, with nothing to indicate what it cost. So we have a situation where restraint can mean wealth, struggle can mean restraint, display can mean wealth, and display can mean debt. The 4 possible readings, and none of them certain from a single observation. This is not a solvable problem through better observation. It is structural. The signals are decoupled from the realities they are supposed to indicate. What follows in this video is a walk up a ladder, $10,000 to $100 million. Not to rank people or assign virtue to any position on that range. The people at each level are not more disciplined or more admirable or more interesting because of the number. What changes as the number changes is the set of constraints available, the options that become possible, and the strategies that start to make sense. Character is not a function of net worth. Choices are shaped by what choices are available. The goal of walking this ladder is not to make you envious of the levels above yours or dismissive of the levels below. It is to show you how the same behavior, a used car, a simple apartment, an unbranded jacket, carries completely different meaning depending on where someone actually sits. And more importantly, it is to give you a framework for understanding your own position with more precision than the shorthand allows. What level are you actually at? What do the constraints at that level actually look like? What do people at that level typically do with their money when they are building something versus performing something? That is the question that runs through everything that follows. Not what does it look like? What is it actually doing? At 10,000 in net worth, the primary financial activity is not building. It is holding. The emergency fund exists in partial form or not at all. One transmission, one medical bill, one lost shift can erase months of effort in a single event. The people navigating this range are not making irrational decisions when they decline to upgrade the phone or skip the weekend trip. They are doing something that looks identical to frugality, but is actually something more specific. It is risk control under constrained conditions. The math at this level does not allow for mistakes. So the behavior adapts to the math. This is the first place the shorthand fails. Someone managing 10,000 to 25,000 in total assets who drives an aging car and brings lunch every day looks from the outside exactly like someone who has made a philosophical commitment to simplicity. They have not, or they may have. You cannot determine which from the observable behavior alone. What you can know is that, at this level, the choice to not upgrade is frequently the only choice available, and recognizing it as a choice rather than a constraint requires information the outside observer does not have. By 25,000 to 50,000, a different distinction starts to matter. There is now enough margin to make choices that did not previously exist. The question becomes where the margin goes. This is where the difference between convenience spending and stability spending becomes meaningful in a way that compounds over time. Convenience spending is the 14 delivery fee that saves 40 minutes, repeated until it is structural. Stability spending is the slightly higher insurance deductible funded with a small dedicated account, the dental appointment made before it becomes an emergency, the oil change that prevents the repair. Both of these can look broke from the outside. The person spending carefully on stability has nothing visible to show for it. The person spending on convenience also has nothing visible to show for it. The balance sheets are different. The appearances are not. At 50,000 to 100,000, the first real trap appears. This is the range where income is high enough to finance a lifestyle that income cannot actually sustain. The car payment exists, the apartment is nicer than the previous one. The credit card carries a balance that never quite clears. From the outside, this looks like success. The person is wearing it. The number on the balance sheet says something different. This is not a moral failure. It is a structural one. When income rises and fixed costs rise to match it immediately, the margin that looked like it was growing does not actually grow. It relocates into monthly obligations, the outward signal improves. The financial breathing room does not. The people at 50,000 to 100,000 in net worth who are actually building something often look worse than the people who are financing an appearance. The car is older, the apartment is functional but not impressive. The watch is not the kind anyone tracks. The financial reality underneath is a different thing entirely. An emergency fund that covers 4 to 6 months. An insurance portfolio that reflects actual exposure. Consistent automated contributions to an index fund that nobody asks about at dinner. Reduced high-interest debt that was treated as a structural problem and addressed like one. None of that is visible. None of it photographs well. From 100,000 to 250,000, the strategy sharpens into something that looks from the outside like an absence of strategy. This is the range of quiet optimization. Used cars purchased with cash or finance briefly at low rates and then eliminated. Minimal logos, not as a statement, but because logos are a premium attached to an object that performs the same function without them. Budget systems that have been running for years and have become invisible habits rather than active disciplines. A household at $200,000 in net worth that is genuinely optimizing is almost impossible to identify on site. There is no signal for it. That is precisely the point. The outward cues that mislead at every level in this range are consistent. An older phone held past the upgrade cycle. Clothing that is clean, functional, and without recognizable branding. An absence of vacation content because either the vacations are not happening yet, or the person posting them is the one at 60,000 in credit card debt and a revolving promotional balance. These signals point in multiple directions simultaneously. They cannot be resolved by looking harder at the signal. The markers that actually carry information are the invisible ones. Whether the emergency fund exists and in what form. Whether insurance coverage reflects actual asset exposure or just minimum compliance. Whether investing is happening consistently and automatically in a way that does not depend on monthly willpower. Whether high-interest debt is declining as a percentage of the balance sheet or holding steady or growing. These are the metrics that separate a 150,000 net worth that is stable from one that is one layoff away from restructuring. They are not observable. They live in accounts that do not post updates. The practical implication of this is uncomfortable for anyone who learned to read financial standing by reading visible signals. If you are trying to understand someone's actual position in this range, the aesthetics tell you almost nothing useful. The question is not what they drive or how their apartment looks or whether they ordered an appetizer. The question is whether their monthly obligations leave room to absorb a disruption, whether their wealth is liquid or locked, whether they are building a margin or managing a gap. Someone in this range who has resolved those questions correctly may look, on any given Tuesday, like someone who has not figured things out yet. The phone is 2 generations old. The car has 140,000 miles on it. The jacket was purchased on sale 3 years ago and has been worn consistently since. There is nothing to see, and that is often the accurate description of a person who has been quietly building something for years and has decided, correctly, that nothing about their situation requires an audience. At this range, survival looks like simplicity because the simplicity is load-bearing. It is doing structural work. The absence of visible complexity is not an absence of financial activity. It is frequently the evidence that the financial activity is working exactly as intended. At 250,000, something shifts. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone at the dinner table would notice. But the internal logic of the decisions changes. Below this number, the primary financial activity is defense. Protecting the margin, preventing the disruption. At 250,000 and above, there is enough stability that the question is no longer whether you can absorb a shock. The question becomes what you do with the excess and whether the excess is visible. This is the first range where lifestyle inflation arrives as a pressure rather than a consequence. The income is there, the money is there, the car could be newer. The apartment could be better, the vacation could be photographed. And a significant number of people at this level let those things happen, not because they are reckless, but because the money exists to make them possible and nothing in the environment is actively pushing back. The social current runs in the direction of upgrade. It takes a specific kind of deliberateness to not go with it. The people who stay boring at 250,000 to 500,000 are not all doing it for the same reason. Some are building toward a number. Some are building toward a feeling of security that the number alone never quite delivers. Some grew up without money, and the caution is structural, absorbed over years, not a policy they revisit. Some have run the math and decided the compounding is more interesting than the car. The behavior looks the same from the outside. The motivations are different. Neither version is a moral achievement. It is a preference operating within a set of constraints that are less constraining than they used to be. By $500,000 to $1 million, wealth starts to live almost entirely in assets. The index fund, the home equity, the retirement account that has been running for 15 years and is now large enough that the monthly contribution is a small fraction of the total. Day-to-day life at this level can look completely ordinary. The person buying groceries on a Tuesday is not performing simplicity. They are just buying groceries. The wealth is in accounts that have no physical presence in the room. It does not alter the size of the cart or the brand of the cereal. It sits in custodial accounts and compounds without requiring attendance. At $1 million to $3 million, the dominant shift is from consumption to ownership. The question stops being what to buy and starts being what to own that produces something. Home equity paid down to a level that feels like an asset rather than an obligation. Index fund balances that generate returns larger than monthly contributions. A small business stake or a rental property or a position in a private fund that a coworker has never heard of and would have no reason to ask about. The portfolio is doing work. The person does not need to be doing additional signaling. The signal is irrelevant to the function. From $3 million to $10 million, 3 things become the actual priorities. Privacy, security, time, not in any order that varies by the person, but those 3 consistently. The decisions at this level are not about accumulation in the same way they were at 100,000. They are about reducing friction. The car is reliable because reliability saves time and attention, not because it is modest as a statement. The house is comfortable because comfort at home reduces the need to spend elsewhere, not because it is understated as an aesthetic choice. Discretion is not a posture. It is a functional preference that reduces attention, reduces asks, and reduces the number of relationships that are organized around what you have. This is the range where looking broke becomes genuinely protective in a way it was not before. Fewer people make assumptions. Fewer pitches arrive. Fewer expectations form around what you should be doing with resources that nobody knows you have. The social tax on visible wealth at this level is real and documented, and the people who have paid it once tend not to pay it twice. The understated choice is not self-denial. It is load reduction. The signals that actually carry information in this range are not the ones that look like wealth. They are flexibility, a person who can change their professional commitments without a lengthy exit process, who buys back time in small sustained increments rather than in visible luxury, who says no to things that do not warrant their attention and does not explain why, who makes commitments selectively and honors them completely. These are the behaviors that correspond to $3 million to $10 million in actual assets. None of them are visible as wealth. They are visible only as a kind of ease that is difficult to source without additional information. Here is the caution that belongs here and belongs to every level before this one. Frugality is not a signal of wealth at any tier. It is also not a signal of struggle. It is a behavior pattern that can emerge from building, from fear, from culture, from values formed in childhood and never examined, from values examined carefully and reaffirmed, from trauma, from preference, from calculation, from habit. A person who lives simply at $4 million is not morally superior to a person who lives well at $4 million. They have made different choices within similar constraints. The choice tells you something about them. It does not tell you something universal about the choice. What changes between $250,000 and $10 million is not the visibility of wealth. It is the degree to which invisibility becomes an active strategy rather than a byproduct of building. Lower down, simplicity is load-bearing. It is doing structural work to protect a margin that cannot afford to shrink. Higher up, simplicity is still doing work, different work. It is managing attention, reducing surface area, allowing the actual wealth to compound in silence while nothing about Tuesday gives it away. That is the strategy. It does not require announcement. That is the point. At $10 million, a structural change occurs that is not visible to anyone standing near you in a coffee shop. The change is organizational. Life becomes professionalized in a way that has no outward expression but is continuous and requires management. There is an estate attorney, a CPA who specializes in structures, not just returns. A wealth manager whose minimum client threshold is higher than most people's net worth. A family office relationship or the beginning of one, depending on where the number sits. These are not status accessories, they are functional infrastructure, the equivalent of load-bearing walls. They exist because the complexity of the assets now exceeds what a single person can track without error, and error at this scale costs more than the professionals do. None of this is visible. The meeting with the estate attorney looks like a meeting. The quarterly call with the wealth manager happens on a phone. The LLC that holds the real estate portfolio is a document in a filing system. The trust structure that protects the assets across generations is a set of papers that nobody at dinner has any reason to ask about. The professionalization of life at $10 million to $30 million does not produce visible artifacts. It produces quietly running systems, which is precisely the point. By $30 million, the dominant concern is not accumulation. It is not even preservation in the standard sense. It is surface area. Specifically, reducing it, wealth at this level attracts attention in ways that create measurable liability. Litigation follows visibility. Fundraising appeals follow visibility. Family dynamics shift around visibility. Reputational risk compounds around visibility. The people who arrive at $30 million to $100 million and stay there without significant loss of either capital or privacy are, almost without exception, the ones who have made a systematic practice of not being findable as a target. Not in a paranoid way, in a functional low-drama, operational way. They are not hiding. They are not performing modesty. They are simply not giving the environment material to work with. This is why ultra-wealth can look, to a genuinely casual observer, surprisingly plain. The clothing is not branded, but it is constructed well. The shoes are not conspicuous, but they last 20 years. The vocabulary around consumption at this level shifts entirely away from labels and toward quality that does not require labels to communicate itself. The uniform is deliberate, not as theater, as friction reduction. The person wearing the same category of unadorned clothing every day is not making a statement about minimalism. They are removing one decision from the day repeatedly, in perpetuity, because the decisions that actually require attention at this level are elsewhere and are serious. The routines are low drama by design. Not because there is nothing interesting happening. Because drama generates coverage, and coverage generates surface area, and surface area generates the problems that money at this scale specifically exists to avoid. The quiet life is the protected life. That is not an accident. It is architecture. Here is where the broke look, if we are still calling it that, starts to develop cracks. Not in the clothing, not in the car or the coffee order or the absence of a recognizable watch. The cracks are in logistics. The person at $50 million does not manage their own calendar in the way that most people understand calendar management. Someone else is managing the approach. Someone else is managing the physical environment in advance of their arrival. The staff is not a status symbol at this level, it is a time accounting system. The time that most people spend on coordination, logistics, maintenance, and the low-grade administrative friction of daily life has been purchased back, and the purchase is invisible to everyone who is not inside it. Time sovereignty is the real signal. It does not appear in any photograph. It does not register in any observable transaction. But the person who can decline something without a consequence, who can wait without anxiety, who can restructure their day around what is actually worth their attention on that specific Tuesday, is moving through the world with a degree of optionality that is very difficult to fake across time. You can decline one thing, you can wait once, you can restructure one afternoon. The pattern over months and years is harder to manufacture without the underlying structure that supports it. Access is the other signal that is almost impossible to replicate. Not access to things, access to people, to decisions, to rooms where outcomes are being shaped before they are announced. This access is not performed. It does not produce photographs. It happens in private and produces consequences that appear later in contexts where the connection is not obvious. This is the level where wealth operates mostly through proximity and timing rather than through visible possession. The possession is almost beside the point. So what does any of this mean for how to read the room at any level? Stop looking at objects. Objects are available. Objects can be financed. Objects are the oldest misdirection in the entire system. Look at behavior. Does this person make decisions without appearing to need external validation of the decision? Do they wait when waiting is correct and move when moving is correct? And are they, across time, wrong less often than the situation would statistically predict? Do they say no without lengthy explanation? Do they choose without anxiety? Do they hold positions in investing and in argument and in relationships past the point where the social pressure would have moved someone without options? Wealth in the end, across every tier from the first 10,000 in a Roth IRA to the 100th million in a trust structure, is the accumulation of capacity to say no, to wait, to choose, to decline the urgency that someone else has decided should be yours. The person who has that capacity and does not perform it is usually the one who built it correctly. The performance is for people who need to be believed. The reality does not require an audience. If you have seen a signal, real or false, one behavior or object that made you reconsider what wealth actually looks like, put it in the comments. It does not have to be dramatic. The quiet ones are the interesting ones. And if this series changed how you read a room, subscribe. There is more practical money psychology where this came from, and none of it requires a visible watch to prove the point.